Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Present.
Ms. Gray?
Present.
Ms. Rogers?
Present.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Present.
And the chair is an aye. At this time, we have public comment available for any speakers. Seeing none, we will move on to approval of the minutes from the December 8th, 2022 meeting. I do want to bring up one item before we start. There's been a request that going forward, the votes are counted as the weighted votes and not as the physical membership. So instead of adding up to 8, it will add up to the total of your weighted vote. Does everyone understand that? Okay. So do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any question or discussion?
I have a question.
Yes, Sharon.
I wasn't sure what you just said. You had a request for what?
Sure, Sharon. Just a request that when the when the minutes are recorded for each vote, the the vote tallies will reflect the weight of the vote, so instead of 8 people voting yay and 0 nay, it won't say 8-0. It depends on if it's a Harwich or a Chatham member. So it could be 2 Chatham and 1 Harwich member, so therefore that would be 3 votes.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear now.
Okay. So we had a motion, that we had a second. So I will, more questions or discussion. I'll do a roll call. Sharon?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. Moving on to reports and discussions. The first item on the agenda is to review the subcommittee assignments updated version. There's a copy in your folder. If everyone agrees, there's no vote required on this. I just want to make sure it's correct as based on what we talked about last meeting. Ms. Gaines?
Yeah, just for clarification, Housing Advisory Committee, I believe we agreed to mark that one off, and that would move over to the select board work, if I understood that correctly?
That is correct, yes. We'll put another amended,
Okay.
once we do any of these corrections, we'll put one more copy in for our next meeting. Ms. Rogers?
And then also I was taken off of the strategic planning subcommittee.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. Any other corrections? Questions? Discussion? Okay, and we'll make those changes and we'll present this at the next meeting just to make sure we have everything right. Moving on to the high school open campus program. We do have a vote requested for this evening. Is Ms. Police here?
I can go talk to it, so.
Do you want to come up or do you want to stay there? It's up
I
to
can
you.
stay,
Okay.
it's fine. In your packet, it's just a cover letter from Miss Police, just saying that she's hoping that you'll support this. On the back side of the letter are the feedback that they incorporated based on what they heard from the school committee last time. So in red are I would say improvements that they made. They wanted to make sure that they're clarifying in this on how the students will sign in, sign out when they exercise open campus, that they set a high bar for the number of parties before one loses it. I think their last presentation here was taking from the discipline code that you have to get 15 tardies to go and get a Saturday school suspension, that the SRO and faculty will oversee the reentry and exit. And I think that I know Ms. Gaines had mentioned something about what if people are speeding to and from, and it's just putting clarity there that not only can you lose this privilege if you violate your junior operator's license, but if you're having any egregious moving violation while you're off campus. So again, just if kids were speeding or violating the junior operators, Tom Clark, the SRO, is going to be notified, and the school would go and intervene. And as I said last week, I fully support this. I do think it's a way to help our young adults practice, good decision making. And I do fundamentally believe that our students will, if we go and set high expectations for them, that our students will live up to that.
I actually have a couple questions, Dr. Carpenter. How many open campus days will this amount to, the way they have it scheduled out, in a month?
So I would say no more than 4. So it's essentially 1 out of every 7 school days.
So my next question is, I'm feeling like, and this is maybe just amendments we could make going forward if the committee agreed, and then let them go forward. But it says that students will have their open campus privileges revoked for 4 months, which, when you only go to school for 10 months, seems like an awfully long time. So I wasn't sure how they came to that conclusion.
I think it's sort of looking at it that it's, I think they say 4 times in a quarter. So I think, again, they were trying to come up with a higher bar than the last iteration was 15 in a semester, which is 2 quarters worth. So I think they were.
Right, so they're saying if they exceed 4 unexcused tardies in a quarter, their privileges are revoked for 4 months. I just was thinking 4 months is a very long time when you're only getting potentially 4 a month, and there's only 10 months in the school year. But that's fine, whatever. And then my only other question was, down under students may drive other students, blah, blah. Any reported motor vehicle moving citations or JLL infractions while on the open campus will result in a loss of open campus privileges. Is there a duration on that for the remaining of the school year, the remaining of the quarter, remaining of the semester?
I would presume that they would follow something like that, 4 months. But I also think that, like other disciplinary things, some of it's subjective. One could imagine that there's a moving violation that is extremely egregious where there's a different disciplinary response. And
the coming back after JOSM ends, so if they're late, the revocation and consequences are determined by the school administration. Is that by our handbook? Like, if you were late to school, would it be the same infraction? Would it be counted as a tardy?
It would be counted as a tardy, but I think what they're trying to leave room there too is,
see how frequently it actually happens.
They may say you're not going to have open campus the next time or the next, over the next month.
We're leaving it loose. That's all I have. Ms. James, and then Ms. Gray.
Just a couple of things. I did hear from a constituent with some concerns, so I am just going to touch on a couple of things. So it says in the memo from Ms. Police, additionally, we will attempt to survey senior parents a second time. I was hoping that we might hear a bit more about that, so I guess I left with the impression that in the 2 weeks that we would get some more feedback, or, and I'm guessing, has that happened that you're aware of?
I think their intent is to, because the way they left it off is that parents, the students would be taking the form home, or, it would be emailed to parents and students, and the parents would have to fill it out, and that I think their want was to have essentially a survey, get parent feedback, and since they're already filling out the survey, that would be a mechanism to get more of a return than what they did when they sent something out to all the parents.
Okay, because I'm just really surprised no parents have shown up to speak about this. I'm really, my mind is blown. And so that's the other thing, which I believe, according to the memo, the other concern that I heard from a constituent was how the businesses are feeling about this. And my understanding, which I think Ms. Police addressed, is should this be approved, then they're going to reach out to businesses to make some arrangements, because the constituent was just concerned that that the businesses might be caught off guard a little bit with a bunch of students coming in, and so I think I believe my understanding is they're going to make some type of partnership after we give them permission.
Yeah, and I think what they were hoping to be able to foster is some sort of deal.
Right.
Go to George's Pizza.
Right.
Get whatever. But I think the reality, having worked for years in a district that had this, I think the businesses in town appreciated that that the students could come and have make it more of a year-round thing, particularly here on the Cape. I do, I think that it's a good thing for the businesses, and I think that I don't see them as getting overrun by this. I'm not imagining sort of this rush of students, students off. Just even in my previous district, that you have sort of like the what theoretically could happen and the way it actually played out.
Right. And I would agree with you, because even with the graduation, the parade since class of 2020, I mean, it's so nice to see the community come together. So my hope is that the businesses would embrace this as well. But I did say to the constituent I would ask a couple of questions. So I think that clarifies those concerns. The additional comment I want to make is I'm really happy to see that Officer Clark is now going to assist with the exit and reentry. So that's helpful, because I think last time we just talked about the faculty doing it. And I would imagine Officer Clark is very familiar with who's on what license. So I think that is helpful, and I really appreciate that. Seems to be an addition from last time.
Yeah. And just in my conversations I've had with principal police, while I would say policing the junior operator license isn't our bailiwick, she very much wants to know, when students are signing up for this, when is that junior operator license period ending? Because if you send, if you're the administrator and your charges are heading off and doing something wrong, she personally has a stake in that, so she wants to know.
Right, I agree. And Officer Clark knows many of our kids, so I'm glad to see that he's part of the entry and the exit. So thank you.
Ms. Gray?
I'm kind of piggybacking off the parent piece. I just have concerns that we haven't heard from them yet, and we're going to send this off as a pilot program. But again, if they have to sign the permission slip first, those that don't want it, I suppose, will just not sign the slip. But if we hear back that parents don't want us to do it, are we ready to change it or stop it? Or
my experience on school committees or being at school committee meetings for decades now is not hearing from parents is usually a fairly good sign. If we go back a year ago or so, we heard from lots of parents.
Different topic.
Different topic, but we heard from lots of people.
And what about the kids that don't have access to cars or people with cars? That's the other piece that I'm worried about, is that it's not really a benefit for all.
Yeah. And I think, so this, and I'll admit that I was sort of a proponent on how this one shifted. So their initial proposal to the committee two times ago when they came was that only students who had cars would be driving and leaving campus. And having been in a different school district where this happened, and you could go with a friend off campus, and that did provide some more of a parity to having students go down to George's Pizza even if they didn't have a car. Oftentimes their friend did. So I think, and I know that Danielle at our last meeting raised this as well, and I think that that's something that I wouldn't let that get in the way of a pilot starting. I think they have to go and look at it, get data on their end on is there are there anything that they need to do to make this more equitable moving forward. But I do think I do think having the ability to go off with a friend, if your parent has given you permission to go off with a friend, does allow for more of it than just there are the haves that have a car or
Right.
the have-nots.
And so they will look at that as options going forward. I know that we were talking about the shuttle
Yeah.
bus and just kind of getting more creative down the road. Because I just worry about those that don't have that option for one reason or another. It's a great benefit. I want them to have it. I think it's a great idea to give them that independence, but I want to see everybody. Thank you.
Any other questions? So it's up for a vote, and I believe it's a vote. Oh! Missed out?
I'd like to make a motion, if we're ready for one.
Yeah, I was just gonna emphasize, that, we need to make sure it says the Open Campus Pilot Program. But, yes, please. Ms. Stout?
So, I feel that this, although not perfectly worked out, is a big improvement. I think that I'm really thrilled with how much the kids, the advisor, and principal police put into this, and even though I know it was frustrating for them, going back and forth for us to get things worked out so we feel more comfortable with it, I'd like to now move that we accept this proposal as amended with principal police's changes.
Sharon, I don't think, that motion's not gonna, well, is there a second? Okay, so there's no second on the motion. Is there another motion? Ms. Henderson?
This may need to be a little wordsmith, but I move to approve a soft launch of the Open Campus pilot program with the understanding that the students, advisors, and administration would revisit school committee in the month of February to share updates and data of the program.
Second?
And we had a second. Any questions or discussion? Tina was a second, yes. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Russell?
Thank you. I share some of the, this is a discussion, I share some of the comments that were made, matter of fact, the last two meetings. And probably by my tone, you could tell that's alliteration. And I had some major concerns about the unsolvable issues this is presenting. And I was less willing, I think generationally, to see the kids strive for this. I was most interested in 2 or 3 of the comments made by my colleagues that had that high hope, as well as Scott's comment. And I'm pleased that at my age, I'm willing to change my mind. So I thank Jen to add these notes to it, and I like a follow-up on it, as it says it will be. So I'm going to, with high hopes, that was a movie years ago, Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly. So on that partnership, I would throw a yes vote into this.
Any other questions or discussion, or shall we roll call? Okay, so we'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. Okay, thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the Monomoy Regional High School Animal Welfare Club donation to the New England Society of Abandoned Animals. We have a document in your packet. There was a donation of $475 for the organization to use to help animals. The money was recently raised at a bake sale hosted by our school's Animal Welfare Club, the Stop and Shop in Harwich. So, do I have a motion? Ms. Henderson?
I move to approve the donation in the amount of $475 to the New England Society of Abandoned Animals from the Animal Welfare Club at Monomoy Regional High School.
Great. And is there a second?
Second.
Tina? And any questions or discussion? And we'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. Next item on the agenda is the Monomoy Regional School District's budget projection, 5-year plan. Michael will be presenting this evening. McMillan, business manager. Sorry. Forgot that part.
Start the egg timer.
Yep. All right. So the quickest 5-year
3 minutes.
outlook. I'm going to have a minute for each year. It'll be over in 5 minutes. So one of the objectives of our budget is that our approach to the budget is we take a longer term look for the budget. So it's not just a year to year look, but we're looking further ahead. And the reason we want to do that is, one, to prepare for upcoming challenges, that we're not caught off, we're not surprised when things happen, and that we can make strategic decisions about how we use our funds, the different types of funds that are available to offset the budget, and that we're thinking about how we use those funds, not just for this year, but are we using them wisely when we know what challenges are coming ahead. And then also, one of the useful things from my perspective as well is that we're able to, if we do, one of the values of making a forecast is it really tests our assumptions and our understanding of what's going on. Because then if we see our forecasts are way off, it gives us an opportunity to look and say, well, what is it that's happening that we don't get? Or what is it we're not quite understanding about what's going on? So this is the first time we've presented this kind of 5-year outlook. So this is me getting my excuses in. So any mistakes is because we're still working on it. But the nice thing about this is we'll do this every year, and now we've got the basis for it. We'll be able to improve on it each year. So from a very simple perspective, the first thing I did was just what are the main items coming ahead over the next 5 years? So in FY25, one of the major items is that we will no longer have the ESSER funds. That's the funds from the states and federal government to help us with the response to COVID. So that's almost $2 million. That's over $2 million in total. We will have spent before we get into FY25. We will also be going into a new contract for all staff, excluding the custodians, and hopefully we'll be starting the process to replace the middle school roof. Then going into 26, we'll hopefully start that construction, and then maybe potentially be looking at the Chatham elementary school roof. Also, that in 26 we'll also see the high school's enrollment peak because of the way the grade structures are, and I'm going to go in more about their enrollment projections, but the enrollment in the high school is going to increase over the next couple of years before it starts to come down. There's also a couple other items over the next couple of years where it may impact on our enrollment. One of those is the Nauset Regional School District coming online, which we know that when Monomoy High School was built, that impacted school choice. We started to see fewer students leaving the district through the school choice program and more coming into the district because this is a nice place to come to be educated. So is that going to happen with Nauset? We're not sure yet. We're obviously coming from a much stronger position because we already have this school, but a nice shiny new school could impact the number of students that choose to leave Nauset or to go there. 27, we may be doing the Chatham Elementary roof construction, and residing the middle school is something that's is clearly becoming more of an issue. We have an issue right now where we're having to replace some of the siding in the middle school, and we think that over the next couple of years we're going to have to really make that a priority, especially once we get the roof done. It would be great if we could then follow up by doing the siding and trim. We'll also see the our enrollment projections. I'm going to come on and talk a little bit more about enrollment projections because it's really difficult to project, but we see there is a general trend where enrollment is going down, and we think by 28 middle school enrollment will be below 350 And the foundation enrollment, that's all the students in Chatham who are attending public schools, whether here or elsewhere, will be below 350 as well for the first time. And then the other big project is the track and field here at the high school. We know that's kind of on the horizon, so it might not be 28, but we know soon we're going to have to start thinking about if we replace that. So when we're thinking about the enrollment, there's lots of assumptions going there. So basically I just take how many students are in each grade and assume that we just move them forward each year. I do a little calculation where I say, well, how do they change? So from grade 5 to grade 6, what do we normally see in terms of change? I think it goes up 4%. So I apply that to what we have, and that's what's happened in the last 5 years. So I apply that to each transition over the next 5 years. But pre-K and kindergarten are very difficult to estimate. It's because we don't have, obviously for third grade, we know who is in second grade. We don't quite have that level of detail when it comes to pre-K and kindergarten. So I've made some broad assumptions there that the enrollment will be the average of the preceding 4 years, but that does take in COVID. So when we saw pre-K go down, and then kindergarten enrollment, I'm just assuming that it increases and then it starts to go down by a half a student or a single student. And the basis for that is when we look at the birth rates, and it's really difficult to draw any kind of direct line between birth rates and subsequent kindergarten enrollment. We do see that birth rates are going down, general trend, and so assuming that will somehow feed into kindergarten enrollment. But it's all up in the air, and actually, when we go into this year's budget and we start to talk about that, you'll see one of the issues we're having is pre-K is up this year. So, but whether or not that's just a blip because of COVID, so some students did not get enrolled in pre-K that might otherwise have been last year, and so now we're still catching up. That's one possibility, or are we reversing the trend and we're starting to see an enrollment increase? That's also a possibility. So these are my kind of projections. I do think that, so all the projections are based on current and historic trends. And those historic trends do include the COVID year when we saw enrollment drop off. So I am anxious that maybe I'm slightly overstating the reduction. But we do see a reduction in all the different categories of enrollment we have. If I'm just moving the grades forward, the grades at the top half of the school tend to be larger than the grades in the bottom half of the school. So as those students graduate, you see the students coming in to fill them, there's not as many students coming in to fill those places. So that's what's really feeding into, I won't go through all the detail in this, but that's what's feeding into my overall, projections of reductions. But, obviously, the further out you get, the less reliable it is, because more and more of the numbers are made up by the pre-K and kindergarten numbers, because each year, they move forward the grade, and each year I've made up the number based on the history. So if there's changes, they will feed through each year. But the further out you get, the more of the students, the grades are made up with my guesses. I think a couple of interesting things is that, I've also included just at the right how these numbers impact us, because the foundation enrollment impacts us really in the assessment. So when we assess the costs between each town, it's the foundation enrollment that impacts how much each town gets, what share of the budget they have to pay for. And then obviously the actual enrollment in the district impacts the resources that we need to provide. And school choice, it does seem to be that school choice out, that's the number of students leaving, will continue to go down faster than the number of students school choicing in. So we're still seeing a lot of students school choicing in. That doesn't seem to, it's going down, but not quite as fast as school choice out, which is good for the district. And hopefully that will contribute to this trend that we've seen. So I like this chart a lot, because what it shows is this is, each bar is all the students, the foundation enrollment of Harwich and Chatham. So that's all the students in Harwich and Chatham that were going to public school. And the blue line is the proportion of those that were coming to Monomoy. And as you can see, progressing from 2016, that blue line's getting longer, which means a bigger proportion of the students in Harwich and Chatham are coming to Monomoy, which I think is kudos to everybody working hard in the district to make this a more attractive place for students, and fewer students are choosing to leave through school choice or charter programs. The only thing this doesn't include is the Cape Tech. It's kind of a different animal, the Cape Tech, because the theory is we're not competing with Cape Tech. They're providing, programs that we don't provide. So actually, it's not really, it's a different, we are in a way competing with NOSIT because we're providing the same sort of type of education. We want to keep those students here. But for students for whom the Cape Tech is the best option, that's the best option, and we encourage them to go there. But so we have seen an increase in Cape Tech students over the last couple of years, and they're not reflected here. This is just one, I just wanted a little aside to talk about, okay, so what's the impact of those enrollment projections? Because often what we will get, and I'm sure we will get this year, is like, well, if your enrollment's down, why is your budget not down? And there's two reasons for that. One is inflation, and we'll talk about that a bit as well. So even if it costs more to pay for one student each year. But the other is that we can't cut the budget for each student fewer that we have, because they're not directly variable costs. This paper I found calls them sort of quasi-fixed or quasi-variable costs. They kind of vary. So if you lose one student in one grade, that doesn't make much difference. If you lose 30 students and they're spread out throughout the grades, again, it doesn't make any difference. You can't cut a teacher, you can't close a building. But eventually, if you keep losing that level eventually you'll start to be able to close, if you close a grade, you'll be able to reduce the number of classes. Because if you lose, a whole section from a grade, then you can make a reduction. But it's only when you have you have the reductions concentrated or sufficiently throughout the district that you'll be able to make reductions. So that's why you see this. I mean, this is all just sample data, and this assumes, it's just an example. But you might see a reduction after 3 or 4 years, you'll see a drop. And after, each 4 or 5 years, you'll see that reduction. But of course, that'll all be masked by inflation as well, which will make it more complicated. Does that make sense? So one area that is we've been thinking a lot about is our debt. So when the high school was built, the district started paying after it had been built, we started paying for the loan that we took out to pay for the building. And the way the schedule of payments works, so each year the amount of payments actually goes down just because of the way the loan is structured. So initially what we were doing is just reducing the budget each year by that amount. But what I'd like to start doing is keeping that amount level. And that's a common practice amongst municipalities. What they call it a debt roll-off. So as the debt rolls off of one project, they roll it into another project because we have more debt needs and also capital improvement needs. So that's what I would see is this where we roll debt off of the high school project, and then that's either funding capital projects in orange there, or other debt, which would be the roof projects, the siding possibly, and the fields at the high school and middle school, at the high school track and field. So you can see when my projection, and there's so many of these things that have to be, there's so many things that will depend on other decisions like the Massachusetts School Building Authority. If we get onto that program, that will determine what year some of these get built in. But if they all went to the plan we have right now, you would see an increase in our debt when we have still a bigger chunk of the high school to pay off at the same time as we're trying to do the middle school roof, start payments on the Chatham roof, and possibly payments on athletics fields at the same time. So a lot of this is just, it's not quite crystal ball gazing, but it's just looking ahead. And this might never happen, but we know these are the kind of decisions we'll be thinking about over the coming years.
Any questions for Michael right now? Ms. Games?
Just a couple of clarifications. Let me just
Yeah.
go back here. Just because I'm curious.
Yeah, of course.
Going back to the birth rates.
Yeah.
Do you get a report of birth rates, or is that research that you do?
That's the state actually produces those numbers by town, so they produce that.
Oh, really? Okay.
They produce a report every year. They didn't have any for 3 years, and all of a sudden we get 2 at once. So it's not always the same date. I think they got impacted by COVID
Okay,
as well.
that's interesting. I
But
didn't
yeah,
realize
so that
that.
comes from the state report.
Okay.
For all
And then on let's see, where it says the other, going back to the since FY '16.
Oh, yeah.
So you said that doesn't include tech.
Tech, yeah.
So I'm going to assume that the other means homeschool? I mean, what would other be?
So it's not homeschool because they're not included, because they're opting out. Other can be like private, but it can
yes,
can
okay.
also be
Okay,
like if there's an in-state agreement. So sometimes we'll have an agreement with another district for whatever reason that they'll educate a student in a public, and it's not
okay.
like so. Just like strange situations happen where a student for some reason has been educated somewhere else
Okay, that's good.
for all sorts of reasons.
I know we don't include the tech,
Very
and I
few.
certainly understand why, but I think just from a community standpoint, that's helpful
Yeah,
information.
I do have it. I just didn't include it, but I can in future
Okay.
slides. Yeah.
I just think that would be helpful, because
Yeah.
that might be a question coming up during budget season, and,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I can tell you that we saw a biggish increase from 21 to 22, and that's kind of been sustained in 23. So it's not grown again. It's kind of stayed levelish.
Okay. One other quick question, with your comment about the Nauset school.
Yeah.
Did you see, or the same thing happen when the tech came on with their new school?
So I think
Okay.
that's part of the reason we saw that jump from 21 to 22 was because
Okay.
of the new building.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines. All right, we'll keep going.
All right. And so you've seen this slide before, but it's just the age of the building. So that's one of the reasons I'm kind of wanting to protect that debt investment, because I know we're going to be replacing some of the major components of our buildings over the next few years as we get to that kind of tipping point. I think the 3 schools where the components of the building are over 20, over 25 years, getting on for 30 years old, we know we're going to want to start to replace them. They might not all be debt projects. We may not have to borrow to do all of those, but maybe we will want to fund them through our capital budget. And then, so the other one of the other major expenditure, or the biggest expenditure of the district is in staffing. And so, I've not really tried to estimate where we'll be with staffing. I have done some forecasts that are just really adjusted for looking at the historic expenditure and assuming how that it will follow a similar pattern. In theory, with fewer, if enrollment goes down, then in theory, the number of students should go down, the number of teachers will go down as well, but we do know that there is a increased need for teachers, particularly in special education and social and emotional support for students. So there's kind of an increase in demand for staff at the same time as fewer students reducing demand. So how exactly that plays out will be critical over the next few years, especially as we no longer have the ESSER funding. We did see an increase from last year to this year, and that's largely because of 7 positions we're funding through ESSER right now. And then this chart, so that dark line there is staffing, and then this grey line under here, which is the other major part of our budget, is benefits. So I would assume that would keep in line with our staffing figures. So this colourful spaghetti here, this is, I kind of broke up the budget into different areas and looked at what the trends have been. So they're kind of, you can see there's broad trends. You would expect this with inflation, even though inflation's been very low, you still see an increase in costs. One area is operation maintenance, where it's kind of been above inflation, and I think that's largely, I know that's largely due to increased investment in our HVAC systems, partly linked to COVID, partly linked to the age of our buildings. There's, what else? The school choice and charter tuition, I believe. I can't actually see where that is, but that came down recently. I think that's come down recently. That's this green line, I think.
Yep.
Is it? Mm-hmm. Yes. Very good. So that's come down, and kept that relatively stable. I don't know if it's going to keep coming down, but also the amount we have to pay will go up a little bit as the state adjusts that for inflation. And special education tuition has varied a lot, but again, there's a kind of trend upwards on that. So there's no huge increases in any of these. I mean, there's a lot of kind of movement. And, so obviously the forecasts are much smoother because I can't see the little blips in here. It's hard to see where they're going to come in future. But it's interesting. It's just I found it a really interesting way to think about our budget and think of some of the trends that are influencing our expenditure and how that might impact us over the next few years. And one of the things, this is just put this slide in to remind us that inflation, having been a relatively non-issue for years, has raised its head recently and is likely to impact all our costs, at least in the short term, hopefully not in the long term. And that is one, actually, just as a quick aside, I have invited a treasurer to come and speak to you in January. That had come up in a couple of our subcommittee discussions. And he'll come just to introduce himself, but he's also going to give us a little financial outlook and what he sees over the next year or so in terms of the economy and how that will impact the district. So this is also interesting. My wife says, Michael, it's not to you whether it's interesting or not, whether or not everybody else thinks it's interesting. But so excess and deficiency, essentially that's the money we have left at the end of the year. And once that's been certified by the auditor, we can use that to offset the future budgets. So you can see this, the blue line here is the actual excess and deficiency that was certified. The light blue line is what is the estimate that's currently is currently with the state to review and be certified. So you can see we're in a really healthy position. So I think that increase is due to a number of things, including reduced expenditure during COVID when we saw the buildings closed. We also received last year FEMA, so we received $300,000 from the federal government for emergency relief. That was not budgeted revenue and all offset all our costs, so that would flow into our excess and deficiency, and that's right in there. So what our plan is to slowly cut. So one thing that we will be asked by Harwich Select Board, no doubt, is why don't you just go ahead and spend all of that, or at least because if we want to be around 4%, which is our aim, why don't you just go spend an extra $1 million from your E&D this year, and that will get you right down to 4%. But the problem with that is that we won't. If you do that, we won't have $1 million for the following year. So that means, so we'll go this year. So if we did that, we'd have a really reduced budget, or a really reduced assessment for the towns. But in the following year, we'd need an extra $1 million from them to make up the difference. And actually, because we've been using $800,000, even if we used all that, it would only be a small reduction. Because we'd go from 800,000, which is what we did last year. We'd only increase it a couple of $100,000. But in the following year, we'd need to make all that up again to get back to where we currently are and stay around 4%. So we'd be back in front of the select board saying, okay, now you need to increase our budget, or need to increase the assessment $600,000 Harwich and $300,000 to Chatham, and that would be a much harder challenge for them. So instead, what we'd like to propose, what we will propose to them, is we can have a gradual reduction. Because a lot of what's made up that increase are one-offs. We're not getting any more FEMA reimbursement. We're not expecting to close schools again anytime soon. So that we'll go to a much more steady excess and deficiency where we're maybe just adding a couple of $100,000 or $300,000-$400,000 to that each year, spending a little bit more than that, budgeting to spend a little bit more than that, and that will slowly, over the next few years, help bring that down to where just around 4% of the budget. So that's the plan, and that's where the $600,000 we have currently budgeted for E&D fits. Does that all make sense? We can spend more time chatting about this as we go through the budget process and assessments, but that's the plan. And I haven't got to spend a lot of time trying to estimate exactly what the assessments will be, partly because the assessments are in part determined by the town property valuation and income. And so it's really difficult to estimate that with any relative certainty. However, what I have done, is just looked at how, with the change in enrollment that we forecast, how will that impact the share? And actually you can see, if you can put that back up, the share does over the next 5 years shift slightly towards Harwich, continues to shift slightly toward Harwich, but it's not huge jumps. And actually, there's 1 year even when it shifts more towards Chatham. So those small percentages can make a big difference, but it's not, we're not forecasting huge, significant leaps. And that's it. So, you can, yes.
Do we have any questions for Mr. McMillan? Follow-up comments?
I was just going to point out that last slide, I remember 10 years ago when we were starting this, endeavor. I think there was just a lot of angst in Harwich that the shift was going to be Chatham, quickly approaching zero and Harwich quickly approaching 100%. But if you look at that, the projection that Michael is putting up there, looks like it's going to be pretty similar to what it's been now, which is what it has been for the last 10 years. So it's so there's been a lot of stability there. Yes, our enrollments are dropping off in both towns, but that ratio that drives the assessment is staying pretty steady.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter. Any other questions for Mr. McMillan before we move on? And we will have more from the budget on our next meeting, and our budget workshop will begin after that.
All right, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Next item on the agenda is adjustment to the January 23 school committee meeting dates. Leah had left on top of your packets just the updated meeting schedule. There's just been a couple changes. We moved the first week in January's meeting is now going to be January 12th. We will have our budget workshop now on January 19th, and then another meeting on January 26th, and then our first meeting in February will be February 2nd. I know that's 3 meetings in January, but given that we've missed a few meetings, I felt it was important to definitely leave it there, especially with the forecast of the budget and in case we need it for anything that we miss going forward, because I know there's some other presentations that we'd like to fit in there as well. Questions? Ms. Games?
Yeah, so January 19th, I will not be here, so that, since you've moved that to a budget workshop, will that be recorded? Because I will not be there and will not be able to participate.
If it's here in this room, then record. Yeah, if we hold it here in the library, we can record it. I don't see there's a problem with that.
Not real happy about it, but I understand why you have to do it, so.
It has to do with the timeline of the budget and having to get the budgets
Yeah.
to the finance subcommittee and then get the draft and then have it presented at the school committee, and we don't know why this was ever, I can let Dr. Carpenter, but I think I'm doing a pretty good job.
Yeah. So one of the things that got adjusted in the regional agreement change that was voted last year is before the budget comes to the school committee, it's the finance subcommittee votes it, that shall have one vote in the affirmative from a member of each town. So that wording now is in there. And we're supposed to have draft budgets sort of in the town offices and the town libraries on the 15th. And we were heading towards this weirdness where we could have the finance subcommittee vote it, but we wouldn't have a regular school committee meeting prior. So this allows the time for the finance subcommittee to vote it, have a school committee meeting, and then head into that 15th. And I think that this was maybe an oversight that we kind of missed on how January would need to play out. But I think this is probably maybe a more appropriate timeline for future Januaries too. That we oftentimes we do like the first meeting and the third meeting in a month, but I think to have it on the second the second Thursday in January would allow us to come back from the vacation, have the finance subcommittee meet, then go into a school committee vote, following up on a vote of the budget at the finance subcommittee.
Ms. Gates?
So, and all that's fine, I understand. It's just, I know that or at least historically, I've been quite involved in these budget discussions. So it's unfortunate that I'm going to miss the workshop. And I guess I need to let the Harwich finance person, our liaison, know that there's been a shift, because he has the 12th, so I'm hoping that date works for him. So, so there are a few folks affected by this.
Understood. Any other questions? All right, thank you everyone for your flexibility on that. Next item on the agenda is Finance Subcommittee reporting out, ironically. Do you want to, Terry, do you want me to? I mean, we were basically, we met last Tuesday and we reviewed exactly what Michael just presented. We may have gone more in depth on some of the questions we have and how we've set up our next finance subcommittee meeting and possibility for some of the line items. So just that we've met and we have our next meeting scheduled. We're following along with the changes as Michael presents them, and we hope to get together in January and keep moving forward with the budget. Terry, anything to add?
No, that's good, Jackie.
Okay. All right. And next item is superintendent's report.
I'll be quick. I'd like to have a couple recognitions. First of all, our middle school STEM teacher, Emily Nyrick, has been honored as the 2022 Barnstable County Science Educator of the Year by the Massachusetts Association of Science Teachers. Ms. Nyrick was chosen to receive the county recognition for her significant contributions in exemplary teaching and supervision of science education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The criteria for the award note that the educators demonstrated a past history of being active, contributing member in the national, state, and local science teacher organizations, provide leadership in the role in promoting and advancing the cause of quality science education among his or her peers, and active in promoting and advancing the cause of quality science education amongst students. Ms. Nyrick was nominated by Ms. Gifford, who was a previous award winner. And then on December 3rd, the Harwich Elementary PTO brought back their holiday bazaar, which was a great success. More than 50 Monomoy High School and middle school students gave up part of their Saturday to volunteer for the event. Many thanks to the PTO coordinators and all the volunteers for making that beloved holiday tradition possible. Congratulations to the Monomoy Regional Middle School robotics team for a strong showing in their first LEGO League competition last weekend. The team was led by Nancy Gifford and Emily Nyrick, who worked hard to prepare and continually rework and improve their robots heading into that competition. We'd like to thank the MIT Club of Cape Cod for their STEM mini grant in the amount of $500 for the high school robotics program, and the Nauset Garden Club and their mini grant for the high school climate action club for $1,000.
Great, thank you, Dr. Carpenter. And moving on, we've approved the high school animal welfare club donation. We did the high school open campus program. We have a second reading and a vote required for the following policies: policy file AC non-discrimination policy, policy file JB equal educational opportunities, policy file JL student welfare, policy file IJLA library resources, policy file JKAA fiscal restraint, and policy file DN sale of surplus equipment. We can have a motion for the packet, which is included in your packet of all the policies. You can move to make a motion of all of them at once, or we can do them individually. Ms. Henderson?
I'd like to make a motion to approve all of the policies presented in our packet.
And is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Games is a second. Any questions or discussion on any of the policies? Okay, seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. We have had the presentation of the warrants, and I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second.
I would second that.
And we'll do a roll call vote out. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And Mr.
Aye.
Russell?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to everyone. It is
Happy Hanukkah.
excuse me, it is 7:28.
Best holiday present ever.
Welcome.